dressed in casual clothes and be just as comfortable as you, but this is a serious topic. And I felt that it required a formal outfit tonight. What Ron spoke of, he skimmed over a lot of things. The computer that I constructed was 2 years before Joe Wozniak made the Apple. I constructed my first computer from chip level. Had to teach myself hardware, the software, hundreds of computer languages, even used to write accounting programs for shipyards and others. Going back before then, when I was 10, 11 years old, when Sputnik was sent up into space, the world's nations became paranoid and suspicious and were afraid that Russia had put up a spy satellite. Well, in fact, that grapefruit-sized Sputnik with the 4 little antennas trailing off the back was nothing more than a radio beacon that you find in an airplane when the plane crashes. It just goes beep, beep, beep. Basically, it was used just to track the satellite and to see how long it would stay in orbit. And most people didn't know that. Well, I converted an old crystal radio so I could listen to the satellite pass over New Orleans every 90 minutes. And that was interesting. You'd hear it. Beep, 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 beep. And, it doesn't sound like much, but most people didn't hear that. They didn't know what it was. And for me, as a 10 or 11-year-old, that was fantastic. And I was struck on space and developing space technology. I even thought of ways that I could build ion propulsion engines, but I didn't have the resources to do that. I had a curious mind, so to speak. I've attended 3 universities. My parents were poor, they couldn't send me, so I worked my way through college. I went to Southeastern Louisiana University, took biology, chemistry, physics. My professors had me teach their biology and physiology laboratories while they worked on their PhDs, and they wanted me to go to med school. I didn't feel that I had the memory to remember every little procedure that was required for all of the operations, and I didn't want to hurt anyone, so I did not pursue that. When I got out of college, I couldn't find a job in biology, chemistry, and physics. During that course of time was the Vietnam War, and I've had family and friends that went to war, and every one of them came back injured in some way, physically, mentally, or both. And I felt guilty that I did not participate in that. So I decided I was going to join law enforcement for 2 years and then make a 2-year commitment to my community and to my country and protecting my fellow citizens. Needless to say, I found it of such an interest because every day there was something new and it fed my curiosity. I studied psychology, human behavior, I studied sociology, I even studied a little anthropology. That all came in handy in law enforcement. You'd think, what are you going to do with all that knowledge that you accumulated? I used every bit of it. And when I left law enforcement, in fact, while I was in law enforcement, Sheriff Kronvich sent me to LSU and I graduated in advanced law enforcement studies. When I got out from there, the district attorney provided me with a LEAP grant to go to Holy Cross College and took criminology, psychology, and sociology. And when I left law enforcement, went into other things. Became a master Ford salesman for a while. I worked as a reporter. I worked as an editor. I always wrote poetry from 1957 on. I have some of the copies of my book downstairs, Within the Heart and Soul. In fact, there's 3 copies in the local author shelf. I just have this George Clinton lifestyle. I love to get involved in everything. There's nothing that I don't have an interest in. And all of this has accumulated over the years. And writing the poetry and all of these resources have come together. Especially when my wife decided she wanted to take some creative writing courses. There were put together the USA campus here in Fairhope. It was held by Joe Formicello and Suzanne Hudson, local writers. And they started giving us these assignments, work assignments, to write little bitty paragraphs and later short stories, and taught us how to develop novels. Well, I've always written. I've written newspaper articles, and I've written poetry, and for me it was not that difficult. But I never thought I had it in me to write a novel or to write a book. And I became addicted. And I started working on that one little story. And I have to add some credit to Ron, who's sitting back there, and he's too modest to talk about it. He's going to be here next Thursday for his book, The Secret Life of David Goins. He's written a masterpiece, and it all started in that creative writing class. I mean, it's just, he started out with a little 1.5-page story, and now it's an over 300-page book. That, you know, it's like reading Romeo and Juliet. It's a very wonderful romantic novel with all kinds of quirky twists and turns that will captivate you. With that class, motivated a lot of us, Julie Moon, Karen, and Vicky, and some other local writers. We decided that we didn't want that class to end, so we formed the Fairhope Writers Group. And through the wonderful work of Betty Jo Wolfe and the Literary Council here in Fairhope, we had access to the Wolfe Cottage behind the library and met there for a long time. And then when the resident writers started residing in the cottage, we started meeting in Julie's home every Tuesday. We'll read what we worked on that week. We'll critique for about 10 minutes. But when I brought my story, it started out as a dream. About 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and I said, I've got to get up and write this down. So I wrote 3 pages of notes, and I brought it to the group. And typically it was a 10-minute discussion. Well, that 10 minutes turned into 45 minutes. I knew I had a winner. And I do computer services as my primary job. I had a slow 2 weeks, so I sat at my computer, and this story poured out of me like water off Niagara Falls. It was actually 3 times longer than this. And I brought the story to the writers group. They looked at it, and they gave it some honest criticism. They felt that it was too legal, too clinical. And I said, I have to take care of this. So I focused this, and I put all the energy of the intent of the story into this smaller book. And the whole intent of this book is to provoke thought. If you don't think about ethics, morality, religion in the context of today's society, in this nation and around the world, then I've failed. And I think you'll find that it is provocative, even controversial. Some people might even say scandalous. Ron just glazed over that in this I have some law enforcement procedures, and there's also a future presidential independent candidate who comes up with this economic recovery and crime reduction act that the news media picks up on it and dubs it, how they like sound bites, they dub it the Legalized Crime bill, hence the title, Legalized Crime. He presents a way that will reduce the size of the federal government to what our founding fathers originally intended. And by doing so, it reduced the expenditures of the federal government. And he delegated all of the other laws other than the Treasury Department, the Commerce Department, and the Defense Department. Everything else was delegated to the states as it was originally intended. And he knew that this would put a burden on the states. Well, he took some of the lesser crimes on the books and legalize them and turn them into legitimate businesses so that states could issue business permits, issue health permits, do health checks, and to recoup revenues through taxes on these new businesses. And on top of that, he had to deal with the high violent crime rate. And this is where a lot of you are going to feel uneasy. As our process is now, there are appeals after appeals after appeals where criminals get out on technicalities. He develops his program that they take those violent criminals, and I've done studies on penal colonies and on crime rates, and I know for a fact that 1.5% to 2% of the world's population commit crimes as recidivists, and they are not retrainable. You cannot rehabilitate them. So what do you do with these people? You put them in a jail for life, or you execute them. Every year that they're in, it costs the taxpayer $40,000 per person to keep them in jail, because the state is their ward, has to take care of their housing, their food, and all of their medical costs. I mean, if you go broke and you can't take care of yourself, commit a crime, they put you in jail, they take care of you. You don't want that to happen. Well, what they've done is he's proposed this. You take these violent criminals and their histories, you remove their names from it, you put a case number on that history, and you pass it to the district attorney. He reviews it, and then actually it's placed into a violent crime computer, and that computer is programmed with artificial intelligence, and it objectively picks out the worst cases based upon the histories of these criminals. And then that's the results of those choices are passed to the district attorney. He reviews them for any possible infractions of the Constitution. And then that's passed on to a judicial review board where there are constitutional attorneys and judges that review the information. And then it's passed on to something else. I won't go into any further details other than it's a program that's called Execution. You'll have to read the book to find out more about that.